As Kenya transitions to a new government, an examination of Uhuru Kenyatta's economic legacy is compelling. Today, we will examine his accomplishments and shortcomings during his presidency. Kenyatta and his deputy, William Ruto, now president-elect, took over the presidency of Kenya in March 2013. This came after a contested election in which they won with a slim majority of 50.3% of the votes cast. They took office shortly after Kenya's progressive constitution was ratified in 2010. As a result, they were given the unique responsibility of providing leadership on its implementation and entrenchment. Economic and social rights are covered in Article 43 of the new constitution. It grants every citizen the right to the highest attainable standard of health as well as reasonable housing and sanitation standards. It also demands adequate food of acceptable quality, clean and safe drinking water, social security, and education. As Kenyatta and Ruto's second terms came to an end, it is important to assess how well they met these constitutional expectations. Uhuru and Ruto's governments focused economic strategy on core aspects of Kenya's Vision 2030, dubbed the Big Four Agenda, during their second term as president, 2017 to 2022. The strategy was built on four pillars: food security, affordable housing, universal health care, and manufacturing and job creation were among them. The government used it to implement projects and policies aimed at accelerating economic growth and changing people's lives. Despite these lofty goals, the government's economic performance has been mixed. On the plus side, the outgoing administration boasts of infrastructure projects in areas such as roads and water. The completed Nairobi Expressway is one example, as are over 2,000 dams in various stages of construction. These initiatives have the potential to improve people's lives. Better roads, for example, will reduce transportation time to markets, while completed dams will reduce disease incidence by promoting access to clean drinking water. However, there are some drawbacks. The country's job creation performance was poor, with unemployment rising by 2.93 percentage points from 2.81% in 2013 to 5.74% in 2021. The weak job creation is explained by the weak economy. Kenya's economic growth, GDP, averaged 4.4% between 2013 and 2021, while tax revenues remained stable at around 14.8% of GDP. The most visible economic legacy of Uhuru and Ruto is a spiraling public debt that has outpaced economic growth. When the duo took office in March 2013, Kenya's public debt stood at approximately 1.8 trillion Kenyan shillings, $17.95 billion, with approximately 45% coming from outside sources. By March 2022, the stock of public debt had risen by 343% to nearly 8 trillion Kenyan shillings, approximately $67 billion. External borrowing accounts for slightly more than half of the total. The excessive reliance on loans has pushed the public debt to GDP ratio above 70%. This has raised concerns about the country's financial capacity to meet current and future debt obligations, interest and principal. As expected, the growing national debt has put a strain on the exchequer. For the fiscal years 2022 to 23, the country will spend 53.8% of every shilling collected on debt service. The high debt servicing costs have impacted the social infrastructure sectors. Consider your health. According to official data, government healthcare spending has barely increased since 2017. It increased from 2.8% of national government spending in 2017/2018 to a meager 3.7% in 2021/2022. As a result, the country has been unable to effectively address the sector's constraints. These include insufficient medical equipment and a lack of qualified human resources. Both have lowered healthcare quality. The country's high disease burden is a corollary of poor healthcare quality. For example, the annual cancer death rate increased by nearly 16% between 2012 and 2018. It is expected to expand further. In the 2022-23 budget, the government allocated approximately 135 billion Kenyan shillings to the manufacturing sector. Satellite industries in the textile, leather, agro-processing, and construction subsectors were primarily targeted. Some progress has been made. Inadequate infrastructure in designated industrial zones, on the other hand, has discouraged private sector participation and reduced the potential positive effects. Energy infrastructure, in particular, appears to be Kenya's manufacturing death knell. According to the International Energy Agency, Kenya's installed electricity generation capacity stood at only 10,730 GWh in 2019, a 20% increase from the previous year's level of 8,943. This level of generation is dwarfed by newly industrialized economies such as South Korea, 581,492, and emerging economies such as South Africa, 252,639, and Malaysia, 175,778. Low power generation is a barrier to manufacturing takeoff, despite its importance to industrialization. As a result, it may postpone Kenya's transition to a newly industrialized middle-income economy with a high standard of living for its citizens. Furthermore, years of failed economic policies, reliance on rain-fed agriculture and nomadic livestock husbandry, low levels of mechanization of food production, and insufficient emergency food reserves have combined to expose swathes of the country to food shortages. By including agriculture in the Big Four agenda, Uhuru's government sought to reduce the severity of these effects. There have been achievements such as the expansion of insurance coverage of farmers, the commissioning of national food reserves, the commissioning of grain dryers, and the opening of agro-processing incubation and research centers. However, these accomplishments have had little visible impact. The current drought in the Horn of Africa region has sparked fears of impending food shortages, with an estimated 3.5 million to 4 million Kenyans facing severe hunger, malnutrition, and starvation. Overall, food production has underperformed between 2013 and 2022. For example, agricultural value added increased from 18.6% to 22.4% of GDP over a 9-year period, a modest increase. This was despite efforts to encourage agricultural value addition, such as the processing of fruits into juices. Kenya, like most post-independence African countries, has suffered from weak institutions and poor governance. Most Kenyans, therefore, welcomed Uhuru's declaration of corruption as a national security threat and his promise to combat it. Kenya has a well-established institutional framework for dealing with dishonesty in the management of public resources. Chapter 6 of the Constitution imposes high standards of integrity on holders of state offices and establishes an independent ethics and anti-corruption commission to ensure compliance and enforcement. However, Kenya remains one of the worst in terms of corruption perception. This implies that the public regards the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission as a dormant institution. There were even accusations that the constitutional body had aided partisan political interests because Uhuru's anti-corruption campaign appeared to target political opponents. The leaked information published in the Pandora Papers recently added credibility to these accusations. The information that was leaked appeared to implicate the president's family in the stashing of fortunes in offshore tax havens. Although the report does not necessarily imply financial impropriety, the anti-corruption body seems not to have investigated these allegations. Nonetheless, the Commission recently demonstrated its mettle by bringing a case before the court that resulted in the conviction of individuals involved in a maize procurement fraud worth nearly $3 million. Yet, many similar cases have dragged on in court for a long time, while others have been dropped. As William Ruto takes office as Kenya's 5th president since independence, Kenyans hope that the mistakes of the previous decade can be avoided and that the gains made can be built on. Will, for example, infrastructure investment be used to maximize welfare gains? Thanks for watching. If you like this type of content, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell for more stories.